in those environments who are susceptible. Mr. Speaker, it's again, to get back to the point of advertising and what the tobacco companies will do. The issue that is there with the point of sale advertising is when you usually walk into a corner store or establishment like that, and you'll see pretty elaborate displays, and the first thing you see when you go to a clerk in a corner store is the tobacco display behind the clerk, and that's what's referred to as point of sale advertising, which has become more elaborate because it's one of the few remaining places that the tobacco company actually has to advertise and to reach out to consumers. In this case, unfortunately, it also reaches out to younger consumers, Mr. Speaker, because, of course, we know that corner stores are frequented by children. And if you have a tobacco display and the cigarettes on the back wall, and every cigarette that you have is on display and it's all lit up and so on, and right next to it on the counter you have the candy display, and you have things that children are interested in, then of course their children are walking in, and the first thing they're seeing is a very elaborate tobacco display, and they're there to purchase candy or whatever the case may be. They see people buying cigarettes freely and so on, and they wonder, of course, their first instances to say what's associated with that, Mr. Speaker, and they take it from there. It can go either way, I guess, but we have to do more in terms of what we're telling our children, in terms of how we're educating our children on the whole issue of tobacco-related illnesses, because as I said, Mr. Speaker, we know that the statistics are good overall, but when you delve into them deeper, the alarming statistics are at the younger age. That's where there's an increase in the number of young girls in this province, Mr. Speaker, that are beginning to that are starting to smoke. I'm told, Mr. Speaker, that I was handed some statistics that actually last year the government collected about $178 million in tobacco taxes. So I was off a bit. I was off by about $1 million, I guess, in my estimates of the tax revenues that came from tobacco taxes that are there. It's a huge amount of money, Mr. Speaker. It's an amount of money. There are items in the tobacco control strategy, I guess, that this government hasn't even touched. You can see, Mr. Speaker, that this is an issue that we are concerned about. We're concerned about a number, as I've made a number of points so far, one being that we think we are supporting this legislation. It should be done. It should have been done some time ago. We know that. We're left wondering why it took the government so long to, as I said, jump on the bandwagon and join British Columbia, who started the whole process to take on the tobacco companies and over tobacco-related illnesses. Why did it take this government so long to get there? They are there now. We're wondering what would happen, left wondering, and we'd like to hear from the government as to exactly what they would do should this come about, that a settlement is reached, whether it be at the end of the entire process, the judicial process, or whether it be in the middle of the judicial process, wherever the case may be, what they would do with any monies that would come forward from the tobacco companies, and exactly where that would go. We're extremely worried, Mr. Speaker, about the human factor in all of this, because nothing matters more than that. How many lives are going to be lost because the government has wasted time and has lagged behind on this and the Smoking Places Act as well, the Smoke-Free Places Act, Mr. Speaker, over that amount of time? How many lives are going to be actually lost in this province because of that? If the government continues to drag its feet on issues such as this, Mr. Speaker, what we're left with is an extremely unhealthy population, Mr. Speaker, that in this province is costing this province more and more on a daily basis in terms of health care, Mr. Speaker. We all know And we've heard it talked about in the past that, indeed there are some doctors who almost under their breath say someday, we won't treat people who are smoking. It may if it ever came to that, what would happen if a doctor refused to say, because you're smoking, because you've spent years inhaling cigarettes and you've given yourself that disease or whatever the case may be, let's use lung cancer as an example, we're not going to treat you because of that. All of it's preventable, Mr. Speaker, if indeed we spend more time and attention on the prevention aspect of it and preventing people from starting to smoke. Through education, Mr. Speaker, is the key. It has to be the key, as I mentioned. If we're going to achieve anything in terms of where we should go with tobacco-free or tobacco-free province, I don't know, Mr. Speaker, if there is anyone who realistically could say that they would not like to see this province as a smoke-free province, Mr. Speaker. I know you would have your opponents, your detractors, who say that they have the right to smoke as an individual. And I guess because this is not, we're not arguing that right now, I guess you have that right as an individual. If you want to do whatever you want to do with yourself in terms of smoking a cigarette, then, do you have that right? But there are those who are out there right now, Mr. Speaker, in the medical community and elsewhere who are saying, well, if you're going to do that to yourself, why should we treat you as a medical person? Why should we take health care dollars and treat you? That's not the argument I'm making, Mr. Speaker. It's just a point that I brought up in light of this legislation. Mr. Speaker, the point is, I guess, that the devastating effects of tobacco-related illnesses are well known, and indeed they've been known for some time. So there has been some time already wasted on this, and that time, no doubt, unfortunately, is going to mean that people become ill, and even in this case, because it involves a serious illness such as lung cancer, whatever the case may be, people are going to die. Why we here talk about such things as joining British Columbia in their effort to sue the tobacco companies. But, Mr. Speaker, I guess you can blame the tobacco companies. They manufacture tobacco, they sell tobacco, and of course they bear the responsibility that if they sell something harmful, if they sell something that they know and the warnings are there that it can hurt you, that it can cause death, that it can cause a number of illnesses, Mr. Speaker, and it's been known for some time that is the case, then why should we continue to allow that to happen? Mr. Speaker, it would be a responsible thing to do to tell Nova Scotians exactly what has happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future in terms of what we do with our tobacco taxes that we get, what we're going to do in the future. And I think that I can say on behalf anyway of our caucus, and I think on behalf of a lot of Nova Scotians, that we're pleased to see that the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the legislation was constitutional, that it was valid, and British Columbia did have the right as a province to be able to bring the tobacco companies to court, to be able to argue the costs that tobacco-related illness have had to the provincial treasury, and at the same time, they argued the devastating effects that tobacco has had on people's health, on their families, on the communities, and on the province as a whole. Mr. Speaker, we in the spring, we knew this legislation had gone before the Supreme Court, and at that point, we encouraged the government to bring forward legislation in the spring sitting. But the government at the time said they were waiting for the Supreme Court of Canada decision. Well, Mr. Speaker, it was our belief at that time, why wait? How much does it cost this province to put legislation together? Because we do have some very competent people, Mr. Speaker, and some qualified people who work certainly at Legislative Council, who work in the different government departments. They could have put that legislation together then. They could have proceeded with that legislation. We could have introduced it. We could have passed it. And then we could have waited for the Supreme Court decision, Mr. Speaker, at that point in time, instead of, sort of like hanging on to the coattails of British Columbia and waiting for them to do that. We could have done all of that, been ready to say when the Supreme Court decision came down, we're ready as a province, we've done our homework, and let's go for it. We would have at least been one step ahead. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, that's in the past. We're here today, and we're thankful for that. So now we've given ourselves the ability as a province to be able to take big tobacco companies to court and to be able to seek damages from them for the cost to our healthcare system, which is that's our primary case, Mr. Speaker. It will also give us an opportunity to be able to highlight in a very public way, Mr. Speaker, and to these tobacco companies the exact damage and the impact that it's had on people's lives and their families and in our communities, Mr. Speaker. And I think it was mentioned on second reading that we shouldn't think for one moment that this is an action that's going to start tomorrow, going to start next week, or even next month, or maybe even next year. I've mentioned it several times, Mr. Speaker. It may take quite some time before such a case can be brought forward. But we need to have a clear indication from the ministers, and in particular, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice, and I'm sure his officials will probably lead the charge, the Minister of Finance, who's going to be called upon to be able to provide concrete information as to how much treating tobacco-related illnesses has cost this province, the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker, who I'm sure is going to be asked through his department to provide that kind of information so that we can put our case together. Let's make a good case when we go before the Supreme Court. Not just a matter, Mr. Speaker, being able to walk into court and saying, okay, we think it costs us, maybe $300 million over the years, and we want you to pay us that money back. The courts, Mr. Speaker, are going to want specific figures, and that's going to be a challenge, and we know that. And Mr. Speaker, let's not kid ourselves. I think if anyone were to ask the Minister of Finance today to give us a definite figure on what it costs to treat tobacco-related illnesses in this province, that's a pretty difficult question to ask. And I think even more importantly, Mr. Speaker, for him it would be a difficult question to answer. Even the Minister of Health, I'm sure, would be hard-pressed to give us, if he were asked to be giving us an exact figure of what it costs us, because it's not just treating cancer, it's doctor's visits, and it's the specialist visits, it's hospital time, all of those costs, the drugs, all of the equipment that's required. It's all going to have to be factored in when we finally present our case to the Supreme Court. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance may wish to correct me, but I would presume that our request would not be in the millions. I think our request may be actually in the billions of dollars, because over the years, I've no doubt that it's closer to that range, the cost that it's been to our province. If we think about it very easily, you can get into the billions. Well, if the member for Dartmouth North says $11.5 billion, that sounds like a good figure to start with for me, and we'll take it from there. It's, I would have thought billions, and I would have thought 10 plus at least billion. That would be a starting point where and don't think, Mr. Speaker, for a minute that the tobacco companies don't have it. They have that money, and if it's taken a toll in lives and people's families in this province, Mr. Speaker, then we deserve it. We should be given it, Mr. Speaker. It's important, Mr. Speaker, to realize that we should by this time, with the education that has come around this issue, that it's not only those who smoke who suffer tobacco-related illnesses, but those who are subjected to secondhand smoke, families and wives and husbands and children who don't smoke themselves. They've all suffered these illnesses. They all require medical treatment. It's going to be a major case for this province. It's going to take some time. There's a great deal of work that has to be done. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, this is a bill that obviously there's an opportunity there for the government and for us as opposition to attack the tobacco companies and portray them in a negative light because of the illnesses and the disease that is caused by their product, Mr. Speaker. But we also have to keep in mind, let's not forget that the Minister of Finance at the same time, while saying we want people to stop smoking, that he also has to collect taxes every year that are coming in from Nova Scotians who continue to buy tobacco products. And it's a significant figure, as I've mentioned in the past, Mr. Speaker. I'll repeat, though, that it raises the question of how much of that money is going into prevention programs. So if we bring in, let's say, $100 million and we spend $4 million to convince and encourage people not to smoke, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say it's working, but I think that most Nova Scotians and most members here in the House, if you drive by your local school, you drive by areas where your local young people gather, you'd still be alarmed at the amount of our youth in this province who continue to take up the habit of smoking. And that's regardless, as I said, with all of the advertising that's been done, the education campaigns and the cost to our healthcare system, the pictures on the tobacco products themselves, they're quite disturbing. They continue to smoke. They continue to smoke. I thought, Mr. Speaker, when I first saw a package of cigarettes that contained those advertisements that had that set of lungs, the ugly black set of lungs, you know, that were tarred from smoking and all that, I thought if anybody at a young, youthful age would ever see that on a cigarette package, that would be enough to stop them from smoking right there. It's not. It's not, Mr. Speaker. Most young people tend to ignore those sort of messages, not even look at them, whatever the case may be. And still, although it's still against the law, we know in this province that it's against the law to sell tobacco to minors, but it's still being done, Mr. Speaker. It's still done. We all know that. There are people in this province that break the law, so we know that will be a factor as well. And Mr. Speaker, until we're prepared to take some of the tax revenue that's coming in from the sale of tobacco products and send a clear signal that we're going to invest that in smoking cessation programs, until that, there's quite, I would say, an air of hypocrisy on behalf of the government to be saying they want to go after tobacco companies for the damage they've caused to our healthcare system and to the province and its residents, but on the other hand, the Minister of Finance more than happy to collect the tax revenue as well, Mr. Speaker.
Now, does Mr. Health even know how much it's cost?
Well, we did raise the point that would be a hard question for the Minister of Finance to even answer. Yeah. That he'd be hard-pressed to come up with a figure how much it actually costs.
Is anyone even looking at it?
But I know, Mr. Speaker, that he'd argue the tax revenue is going to the Minister of Health, for example, to help him deal with people who have suffered tobacco-related injuries, and that's probably the case for a significant part of where the money goes. But where do we start putting an end to that problem, Mr. Speaker? That's the question. We have to start. Where do we start trying to at least control the problem to the point that it's going to hopefully become a more minimal issue? I don't know if we'll ever get to see that, but at this point, we're a long way away. People are still smoking, Mr. Speaker. That's the unfortunate part of it. And as I said at the beginning of this, of my debate, that I don't know if we'll ever be able to stop that, if we'll ever be able to say that this is a smoke-free, totally 100% province, because we have the ability and we're doing it. We're banning people from smoking in certain places. But until we get that message across firmer, I don't know. The government will continue to raise taxes in the hope that they'll discourage people from smoking, but they're still buying the cigarettes to raise those taxes. You can walk into your average grocery store today, Mr. Speaker, a corner store, and the first thing, as I mentioned before, that you're going to see behind the cash register is going to be that big display, all neatly packaged and put there with big lettering and the whole thing of big display of cigarette products. So if you go in for a loaf of bread or some milk or whatever you're going to, you may be going to, check your lottery tickets to see if you're as lucky as some people winning the millions of dollars that you can win on a lottery. If you go in to check your tickets, there it is. The first thing that you get when you go in there, you see that big attention, here's cigarettes. Mixed messages is exactly right, So you need legislation that would ban those tobacco product displays, those point-of-sale displays, is another area that you have to go after. If someone wishes to purchase tobacco, let them ask for it. Let the clerk go get it where it's out of sight. Instead of allowing tobacco companies to be right there at the point of sale and influencing not only ourselves but influencing our children, especially, is what I'm worried about here. It would cut down as well, I think, Mr. Speaker, on some of the crime. That's where we are in this day and age because of what we've done in some cases. And again, eliminate them would be my solution, but what you've done actually has made them more attractive to criminals because they're there in corner stores, whatever the case may be. So the professionals have told us, Mr. Speaker, that having those displays where they're located, that's one of the temptations that continues to exist for people to continue smoking. Let's say you're an ex-smoker and you walk into a corner store on a regular basis, and again, the first thing that you're facing is the big tobacco display. Here it is. So until we make those changes, and we're going after the tobacco companies here to sue them for smoking-related, tobacco-related illnesses, we have more that we can go after the tobacco companies for. For instance, we can go after them for the point-of-sale advertising. And until we start making the changes as a province that we need to make, rather than for the minister, then we have a problem in that area. We go after big tobacco, so don't worry about the displays. The kids who are still smoking, the statistics. We go to court. We have a plan. It can't be the only plan that we have in terms of tobacco in this province is that we're going to join BC to sue the tobacco company. We have to have an overall strategy.
What about more taxing?
Of how we could and that's certainly a point that the Minister of Finance is going to consider before he brings out his next budget. It's almost a tradition in this province that the cost of tobacco goes up with the introduction of a new budget.
More revenue.
Because it creates more revenue.
But does it go to smoke cessation?
But does a fair percentage of that go towards smoking cessation programs? Now the answer, even the Minister of Finance would be able to answer no to this, because if you take a look at the two sets of figures, 178 million and 4 million, how that's not what you'd call balanced in any way, shape, or form.
It's a bit of a weak message.
So you can assume, yeah, it is a very weak message, and you can assume that that's going to happen again. Then in the next provincial budget, you can assume, more than assume, I can say you're guaranteed that the cost of tobacco-related products will go up. But you can also assume that the cost of health promotion, prevention, associated with cessation programs is not going to go up percentage-wise compared to the cost of taxes that are going up. It won't be an equal footing at all. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that the Minister of Justice will keep us up to date and keep us abreast of what's going on with this legislation as it moves through the courts. As I said, it doesn't always have to take years for legal battles to reach their conclusion. Settlements can be reached out of court, and when they are reached of court, it tends to happen sometimes either quickly or the day before the court case actually starts on the steps of the courthouse. Whatever the case may be, we should be given frequent updates as to where we are, what our chances are, not wait until just British Columbia has gone to court and then say once a decision is rendered, now we're going to go. We have to be there, in other words, in terms of if we're going to be a player in this, Mr. Speaker, we have to be there as quickly as we can, put our case together properly, and we know that we'll have a good case and provide the statistics that are necessary for us to win our case. From the time British Columbia actually started its action until the time we get a final decision, Mr. Speaker, which I would submit to you more than likely, if I had to guess, it ended up in the Supreme Court and so on. There will be, I don't know, I'm not a legal beagle here, Mr. Speaker, but there would be possibly appeals and so on and so forth. And the government stay the course. That's, I guess, the message is you've made a good decision. Stay the course. I'm sure Big Tobacco is going to fight this as long as they possibly can, to take it as high as they possibly can. In the end, will be the Supreme Court of Canada, so it's going to take some time, and let's move on it from there. Mr. Speaker, we should be able to, and we always do, debate in this House the merits of legislation that the government brings forth, and you know, whether they're good or they're bad. We know that for instance, it's a decision that the finance minister takes sometimes as to as I said, in each individual budget, whether or not to raise the cost of tobacco products. But it's a tradition that they do go up, and it's a certain thing. So we know there's going to be more tax revenue in the next budget that will come from tobacco-related products. We know it's going to be there. We know that it's not going to go away, that because those taxes are being taken from those products, but those products are still in use, so the illnesses associated with those products are not going to go away. They're going to be there. So again, Mr. Speaker, an overall plan would be a good idea, I think, for this government to come up in terms of a tobacco strategy. I think, Mr. Speaker, that you know, and I say this sincerely, that what we're trying to do here is to help people in this province. I say that in all sincerity because I firmly believe that the government is doing that in this case. We don't have much control sometimes, unfortunately, over what people, or nor should we, over what people do in this case, Mr. Speaker, but I think we have the ability as legislators to openly debate the pros and cons of any subject, and we do that on a regular basis. You bring up subjects such as tobacco, and let me tell you, you'll spark a lot of debate in a lot of places and communities, whether or not we should be banning the actual use of tobacco in some places, what we should be doing in terms of educating our children, if we do enough to educate them on the pros and cons of smoking tobacco. And of course there are no pros as far as I'm concerned, but certainly if you brought it up that you know, should we take on the big tobacco companies in terms of a lawsuit, I really can't see any argument that could be made to oppose that, Mr. Speaker. I did have an email from a constituent who said, quite bluntly, if you're going to agree with taking on the big tobacco companies to you know, help recover costs and tobacco-related illnesses, then seriously, why don't you just ban tobacco in this province? Why are you going to be so meek as to just say, I agree with the government? Why don't we go all the way? Why don't we ban tobacco? We know it hurts people, we know it kills people, and why don't we just make it illegal in this province? And again, you have to get back to the fact that unfortunately, and I'm not using it as an excuse, but if there's $178 million in tax revenue that comes from tobacco-related products, we're going to have to find a way to make up for the day, and I hope the day does come that indeed we wouldn't have any revenues from tobacco-related products, Mr. Speaker. That I guess as a population, all of a sudden we would wake up someday would be a dream that we'd say we're not, as a group, we're not going to smoke anymore, and we're not going to do it because we know it's unhealthy and it's not good for you. That would be a dream, Mr. Speaker, but it's never, I don't think we'll ever realize that fact. But we can control it, and we can regulate it, and we're doing that, and we should be doing more about that. But again, back to the actual bill itself, the Tobacco Damages and Healthcare Recovery Act, Mr. Speaker, we see this legislation as being good legislation. We take on the tobacco companies, again, very carefully, making sure that we've made our case, making sure that we know before we go into that battle exactly how much it's going to cost, making sure how much we're asking for, making sure that we're going to try and achieve a fair settlement with a strong case. You have a better case, the stronger your case, of course, the stronger your preparation, the better you've done your homework, then the stronger the case you will have to present to the courts. And we can expect, as I've said, we can expect a battle. But all of that you have to weigh against how much it's going to cost us. All of that cannot even be compared to the human factor. The human part of this, Mr. Speaker, is that we know how much it costs this province in terms of lives, in terms of illness, and because of all of that, how much it costs us to run our health care system, which is beginning to eat up the entire budget of this province. We know tobacco-related illnesses play a big part of that. The cost of those illnesses alone in our health care system, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest, and again, to put a figure on that, is indeed a tough task. Not an impossible task, but a tough task. And it can be done. Too much time has already been wasted, Mr. Speaker, on this. We've taken the time to say, you know, we wait until we see what other provinces are going to do. We already knew that it was the right thing to do. We already knew that we should do it, but we sat down and just watched. And we shouldn't be doing that as a province, because we know we have a high incidence of smoking in the province of Nova Scotia. The highest, I think, in the country is in Quebec, if I'm not mistaken, according to statistics that I read. At least that would be an educated guess, anyway, that it would be in Quebec. And we would probably, I'm guessing, would be in at least the top 5, if not the top 3 of the other provinces. So we know that we've got a battle on our hands with the tobacco companies. We should be prepared for that battle, as prepared as we've ever been, because we've seen how nasty that the big tobacco companies can be. And we see how clever they are as well, Mr. Speaker. You know, we've seen them work their way into advertising of everything from tennis matches to car races to golfing. You know, they're always there. And it's almost become, not subliminal, but it's pretty close, the message that's there that you'll always get money for your sporting event from the big tobacco company. Just don't say that we're a big tobacco company. Call it something else. So we have to be very careful how we play this game, not a game, but how we play this court battle with the tobacco companies, and go into it fully prepared to take them on and make a stand and get what we justly deserve in this case. And I think all parties would agree with that we have to make a stand now. Now is the time for that stand, and let's do it properly. So having said that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise to say a few words on Bill number 222, an act to recover damages and healthcare costs from manufacturers of tobacco. Mr. Speaker, I was just looking at the press release that was issued by the government when this bill was introduced back in October 13th. And the minister was saying that more than 1,600 Nova Scotians die each year from smoking-related illnesses, and another 200 from secondhand smoke. Mr. Speaker, I think those numbers speaks for itself. Mr. Speaker, as the minister indicated in his opening comments when this bill was introduced, second reading, that this bill is about holding the tobacco industry accountable. Mr. Speaker, when we looked at how many Nova Scotians die from smoke-related illnesses every year, and I'm quite sure your family, as my family, as everyone's family, have stories to tell about loved ones, losing loved ones to smoking-related illnesses. But I think looking at this legislation, Mr. Speaker, we have to recognize there is no doubt that our provincial government, along with every other provincial government in this country, has spent millions or billions in treating people suffering from lung cancer or related illnesses. Mr. Speaker, again, looking at these statistics, how many people lose their lives every year here in the province of Nova Scotia, we can certainly understand very quickly that the provincial government spends millions every year and have been spending for many, many years. I know of personal friends, family members who have lost their lives over the years to smoking. But Mr. Speaker, when I look at, and I want to start off today, when I look at the estimates that were tabled here earlier this year by the Minister of Finance, this year the province of Nova Scotia is looking at bringing in $177 million in tobacco tax. When I look back at 2003, 2004, Mr. Speaker, the revenue back then was $166 million. So in the last couple of years, that profit, Mr. Speaker, has shot up by another $10 million. And at the same time, we keep hearing people who have kicked the habit, who are stopping to smoke, Mr. Speaker. So it's kind of interesting to hear that the profit is going up. Yes, we recognize, and it seems to be pretty well a tradition. Every time that the Minister of Finance tables his budgets in this House, tobacco tax in the province of Nova Scotia goes up again and again and again. But the sad part about this, Mr. Speaker, is where is actually this money being spent? This year, Mr. Speaker, the province is looking at bringing in or taking in $177 million. We know we are spending approximately $4 to $5 million in smoking cessation programs. I know in southwestern Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, through the regional hospital in Yarmouth, staff have been offering programs to help people to stop smoking. I know, speaking with a few of my friends that were involved in working with smokers, had indicated to me, unfortunately, they could not take in more people because they didn't have enough money. I recall, Mr. Speaker, having notified the minister responsible for the Office of Health Promotion that our part of the province needed additional funding because there was additional requests from people that needed help to stop smoking. I remember, Mr. Speaker, putting an ad out to inform the people of the municipality of Clare that the provincial government had some programs, had funding set aside to help smokers to stop, to kick the habit or stop smoking. I must say that the department did provide some additional funding. An additional course was offered through St. Anne's University in Church Point to help people to stop smoking. And I know at least a minimum of 20 to 25 people took the time to contact our office to get more information because they were serious. They were serious about stopping this habit of theirs. There's no doubt, Mr. Speaker, the more programs that are available, the more help that we are providing Nova Scotians around the province. And I must say, the government needs to be congratulated upon those initiatives. But is there enough? Is there enough? Probably not. Probably not. Because I know in Clare, in Digby County, in Yarmouth County, the funding, after we were told by staff that works at the Yarmouth Regional Hospital, they had no more funding available to help provide these programs to help smokers to kick the habit. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, we're hearing that less and less people are smoking in the province of Nova Scotia. You have to wonder. In 2003, 2004, the province took in about $166 million in tobacco tax. This year, the province is projecting to take in about $177 million. So on one hand, we have less people here in the province of Nova Scotia that are smoking, but at the same time, the government is taking in more money from tobacco tax. Of course, Mr. Speaker, seems, as I've said, every budget, the Minister of Finance looking to bring in some additional revenue, the tobacco tax goes up. So again, when you're talking to retailers around home, prices varies, Mr. Speaker. You can buy a pack of cigarettes for around $8, or it goes from anywhere between $8 and $10 for one pack of cigarettes, Mr. Speaker. I have a brother, been a heavy smoker most of his life, still does, recognizes that smoking is not good for him. He recognizes that the price of cigarettes has gone up over the years. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, that the government continues to increase the tobacco tax, we know that retailers are losing money. Why? Because there's no doubt, and we see this practically on a regular basis, that the underground economy basically tries to take a piece of this business as well, Mr. Speaker. It's not fair. Retailers at home, as across this province, are losing. And a lot of the small stores, Mr. Speaker, could certainly use these extra few dollars that they are losing along the way, every day, to help them with their business. So, Mr. Speaker, when I look at at how much the provincial government is taking in, and at the same time only making $4 to $5 million available. So $4 to $5 million out of $177 million, Mr. Speaker. That's the part that I have difficulty understanding. We know that more people are asking for help to stop smoking. At the same time, the government is taking a big chunk in, but they're putting very few dollars available to help people to stop smoking. Mr. Speaker, I hope with this bill that's before the House today, Mr. Speaker, that will allow the government of Nova Scotia to sue for damages for healthcare related costs. Mr. Speaker, I hope that the government will consider, and I hope that the Minister of Health will remind the Minister of Health that every dollar that the province of Nova Scotia is taking in, we need to do a better job in helping Nova Scotians to stop smoking. Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that smoking is not good for you, and I'm not going to enter that debate. But however, I think it's absolutely critical that the government recognizes the $4 million that they do put forward to help Nova Scotians to stop smoking is simply not enough. Not enough. As I've said, people in Clare that were interested in signing up and participating in these cessation programs, unfortunately, there was not enough funding available through the Yarmouth Regional Hospital to allow these courses, these programs, to be delivered to all those that were interested in taking these. So again, Mr. Speaker, if the programs are available, I'm sure the pickup will certainly be available as well. Mr. Speaker, this bill, as we have said throughout this debate, the Department of Health when we look at the department's health budget, the millions, or probably billions from over the years, that the government of Nova Scotia has spent in treating people here in our province suffering from lung cancer and related illnesses. So this bill, Mr. Speaker, are we looking at recovering the full cost? For 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, how far is the government looking at recovering, Mr. Speaker? We don't know. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Minister of Health, the Minister of Finance has some details over this, what they're looking at. Probably the Minister of Justice probably has a better idea in terms of how much the province is looking at recovering from big tobacco companies. Mr. Speaker, I think we recognize the people that are suffering from lung cancer and smoke-related illnesses, but we have to recognize there are people in this province that are suffering, families that are suffering from secondhand smoke. And as the Minister indicated back on October 13th, we have approximately 200 people annually that loses their lives to secondhand smoke. So again, Mr. Speaker, the need to recover these damages certainly goes beyond recovering the full cost of people who were smoking or who were affected from smoking directly. So again, Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely critical that we need to consider a lot of people, and I know there's a bill before the House, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about the smoking bill at a later date. But again, Mr. Speaker, we need to do a better job in the province of Nova Scotia. We know that the government continues to raise tobacco taxes in the hope that it will discourage people from smoking, but we do know that people are still smoking, still buying cigarettes. The revenue that the province is taking in is increasing again this year as it's being projected, Mr. Speaker. So we need to do more. We need to do more for the people of Nova Scotia, to protect them, and of course to help them to stop smoking. When I look at more than 1,600 Nova Scotians are losing their lives every year to smoking-related illnesses, 1,600 a year. That's many people throughout all our communities. So again, the government could be doing a much better job in helping Nova Scotians to stop smoking and to certainly lower these statistics. Mr. Speaker, this bill number 222, is going through third and final reading. Of course, Mr. Speaker, this bill is going to go through third and final reading at some point. Our caucus is definitely in support of this bill. But the big question is, what will happen to this bill after it goes through third and final reading? I know, Mr. Speaker, the last clause of this bill says this act comes into force on such day as the Governor and Council orders and declares by proclamation. Now, that, Mr. Speaker, raises another question, because this government has a track record. We do all kinds of legislation through this chamber, Mr. Speaker, but unfortunately, when some of this legislation goes through, it seems after the House adjourns, that legislation just set aside. I think it's absolutely critical that this legislation, once it receives third and final reading, that the House adjourns at some points in time, and in the very near future, that this government proclaims this bill to allow this bill to move forward. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice has indicated a lot of research will have to go into this. And I'm sure a lot of research has already gone into this. Mr. Speaker, we know, and I'm sure the Department of Health knows, how much, and the Department of Finance as well, how much money has been spent in the last year, over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, and longer, I'm sure. Those numbers are available. I would love to know from the Minister of Justice, when he does the wrapping up on this bill, if he could provide the House with a little bit of information. What's going to happen once this bill goes through third and final reading? Now, again, Mr. Speaker, this is nobody expects this to be dealt with overnight. This is going to be a long process for the government of Nova Scotia to file suit in order to reclaim damages costs from big tobacco companies, manufacturers, from over the years, from smoking related illnesses. So, Mr. Speaker, this whole process of reclaiming or seeking damages from these tobacco companies from a certain period of time, and again, we have not been advised in terms of how long the provincial government is considering when they will decide to file their case. But as it was mentioned here before, Nova Scotians, should not even consider for one moment that this action is going to start tomorrow, if the bill goes through third and final reading today. It's not going to start the next week or the next month, as the minister indicated. The provincial government needs to do a lot of research before they file their case forward. This is a long process, Mr. Speaker. It's going to take quite some time for our government, for the province of Nova Scotia, to bring their case forward. That will be presented in the courts. I'm sure that the people, the public servants involved into putting our case together, there's a long process forward, I'm sure. There's no doubt that many people are looking forward to this. We'll be watching this very closely, as it evolves through the courts. This bill, Mr. Speaker, will allow the provincial government to take legal action against the tobacco manufacturers, the tobacco companies, to recover health-related costs associated with tobacco-related illnesses. As I've said, the minister had indicated that the government will be doing research toward advancing our case in the courts. Again, with no time frame that was shared with us, Mr. Speaker, we can only assume it's going to be a long road ahead, a long process, and I don't believe for 1 minute that we're going to start looking at filing our court case any day soon. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, when you raise expectations, of course, people always love to jump to conclusions. How much are we looking at recovering? In terms of millions or billions, and I suspect we're probably looking at billions. At the same time, of course, we're going to have to wait for the courts to render a decision over the case that will be brought forward. But again, jumping ahead in terms of how much money can we expect? Where will that money be spent? Certainly that, Mr. Speaker, brings on a different debate altogether. Mr. Speaker, we've seen this government, I'm sure everyone will remember, for quite some time. I remember, Mr. Speaker, the former member from Cape Breton Nova often spoke about the electronic toilet seats. I think, matter of fact, he said in this House that he had one. He had purchased one along the way, just, I guess, to remember about those good old days. Well, not long ago, we saw that just before the last provincial election, when this Tory government offered $155 checks. Mr. Speaker, I recall in my first campaign in '93, when I was going around, I remember coming across a couple individuals, and they caught me off guard at first because it didn't really caught on quite quickly. They wanted to know if I was offering small bottles of liquor, and I did catch on, and I told them, unfortunately, that practice was no longer in effect. That practice had been set aside. But then when I look at the last campaign, people receiving $155 checks, and I know some people at home have kept that $155 check, and they framed it to remember. They haven't cashed it, no, Mr. Speaker, because they want to keep those for keepsake. And I'm sure we haven't heard the end of those $155 checks. But again, Mr. Speaker, I remember our Premier talking about waiting for more money coming from the federal government, hoping someday he could again look at providing the people of Nova Scotia with a tax cut. So again, Mr. Speaker, it certainly raises the topic once again. Assuming that some profits, some funding may be received by the province at some time down the road. Exactly what is the government planning to do with this money? So I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, this will certainly be brought back to the floor of the House in the weeks and months and years to come, because I don't expect a decision over this any day soon. We may have a different party in government. Who knows what the future may hold. Politics in Nova Scotia, as you're aware, Mr. Speaker, it's hard to predict sometimes. There's one thing for sure, at this game, the people are always right. And win or lose, you have to respect the outcome of that exercise. So again, coming to this bill, Mr. Speaker, and I'll close by saying this bill, number 222, an act to recover damages and healthcare costs from manufacturers of tobacco, is certainly not going to happen tomorrow morning. It's not going to happen for a long, long time. But this bill will allow our province to go forward, to try to recover healthcare costs associated with tobacco-related illnesses. I know, Mr. Speaker, as everyone here does, it's going to be a long process. Don't expect any decisions any day soon. There's certainly high expectations that are created naturally from this piece of legislation. Again, our caucus is in support of this bill. We're in support of this bill going through, and I hope that someday that we'll have an opportunity to be provided with an update, exactly where the bill stands, where we are with our case, so the people of Nova Scotia will be informed along the way, not left in the dark, whether this bill leaves this House or the province of Nova Scotia will actually get a chance to put their case forward at some point in time. So I hope that the government of Nova Scotia will continue to inform the people of Nova Scotia on exactly where Bill 222 will lead us, hopefully, to recovering some of the millions or billions of dollars from over the years that have been directed towards helping people of Nova Scotia with tobacco-related illnesses. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll recognize the Honourable Government House Leader to close debate.
Speaker, I move that we now adjourn debate on Bill number 222.
Motion is to adjourn debate. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 232, the Optometry Act?
Bill number 232, the Optometry Act. I recognize the Honourable Member for Richmond. Oh, excuse me, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this bill be now read for the third time.
Motion is the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and speak a few moments on this bill. Mr. Speaker, like so many other bills, this is one that has come forward from an association of professionals that are seeking to make very important changes to the way their profession is governed, and there are other organizations that will also be bringing in these kinds of bills as well, Mr. Speaker. And you know, I believe we're all very aware of the importance that optometry and the practice of optometry plays in our province, and we've certainly come a long ways when one looks at the technology that is available today, not only here in Nova Scotia, but I believe throughout the entire world. And so as a result of that, it's extremely important that optometry, the legislation itself, both governing and licensing optometrists in this province, be brought forward. Speaker, I know that, for example, one of the other organizations that has been looking for government to make changes to the way that they are governed is the dental hygienists here in this province. And I know that prior to the House sitting, I certainly had received a number of representations from members of that association that were hoping that there was going to be a new act brought forward in this House to deal with dental hygienists, and unfortunately up to this point in this sitting that hasn't taken place. And I'm certainly hoping that there's ongoing discussions both between the Dentists Association and the dental hygienists here in this province that will allow that bill to come forward as well, because that is certainly another profession where a great deal of changes in their practice have taken place, but unfortunately they continue to be governed by legislation which has been on the books for quite some time. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, this is an example of where this legislature is working and bringing forward such legislation for these organizations. And I know that the optometrists have done a great deal of work in making representations, not only to government, but to the other caucuses in seeking these changes. And it makes it that much easier for us as legislators when we know that the members of the associations themselves are coming forward and asking for these types of changes to take place, because it's always a difficult position where government on its own decides to impose these types of changes, and then we're left with the members themselves either not supporting the changes or questioning why those changes have been made. So this is certainly an important step in protecting not only optometrists, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, in protecting the Nova Scotians who continue to use the services of opticians. Mr. Speaker, in 2005, it's no longer a matter of just prescribing a set of reading glasses or glasses for corrective lenses for vision. Speaker, we find ourselves in a day of contact lenses, which are certainly have evolved over a number of years to when they first appeared, I believe probably in around the area of the 1980s, and it was the old hard contact lens. It was actually a glass that was being inserted into the eye. And following that, Mr. Speaker, we even saw a case where people were being given a lens that could actually be kept in one's eye for 24 hours and could be kept for certainly in some cases for weeks, if not months. And it was a question of whether that was causing any damage and whether there was new technology. And today we find ourselves, Speaker, with new contact lenses now. Some are daily contact lenses, others are new brands that are considered to be breathable contact lenses, which are better for the eye. And in fact, Speaker, I wear those today as I speak. So it's certainly come a long ways from the first days of contact lenses to where we are at today. And for example, Speaker, one of the other changes that we've seen in this practice is now the prevalence of laser surgery, Mr. Speaker, which we are seeing more and more that Nova Scotians are taking up the opportunity, I should say, to be able to go in and to have corrective surgery done on their eyes, so that they don't have to wear glasses anymore. But you know, it's, as I've learned, Mr. Speaker, in looking into this, it's not a guarantee that you'll never have to wear glasses again. In fact, they'll tell you up front that it'll correct your vision, but more than likely, once you reach in the age of the mid-40s to early 50s, there's a good chance you will need reading glasses, even after having the corrective surgery. So it's an indication when one looks at this act and one looks at modernizing this society of some of the examples of the changes that have taken place in the practice. And you know, certainly, Speaker, there are many more people that are practicing optometry here in our province than what we had years ago, and it seems to be that more and more that children at a younger age are being tested for vision problems and are having to wear glasses. And again, that raises the issue of whether there's anything that can be done to try to correct those matters. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, I grew up in a family where we were told if we ate our carrots, we'd have good vision, and out of 4 kids, we're all wearing glasses. So I question whether that advice works so well. And I can tell you, Speaker, I actually did enjoy carrots. They never had to force me to eat them, but my vision is quite poor right now. They were cooked, and I don't know if the Minister of Education is suggesting that that wasn't the right approach, but we certainly had lots of them, but we all suffered from vision problems in the family. So carrots might have assisted, but obviously there was something else that might have been missing in that. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, this is important legislation to bring about the changes to the practice of optometry. But again, Speaker, it allows me to remind the government that in the past we have seen how many bills come through this House. I believe our House Leader has risen on a point of privilege on this issue, that the government will see have it pass its way through this House, and then at the end of the day, it sits for months, in some cases for years, before it's actually proclaimed and the regulations are drawn up and the regulations are put in place. And hopefully, Mr. Speaker, is that with this bill, we are going to see the changes necessary, and that the government will implement those in a timely fashion. And I think we owe that responsibility to the members of this profession, because they've taken the time to bring forward legislation through, I'm sure, Legislative Council and also, I'm sure, staff from the Minister of Health's office. And so they've invested a significant amount of time in this. And I think it would be completely unacceptable if at the end of the day it makes its way through the House. I think it's safe to say that this legislation has all party support. And if that being the case, I see no reason why the government would have any sort of delay in proclaiming this legislation and putting the regulations in place and allowing this profession to modernize itself as it has done here. And again, Mr. Speaker, there are, as I've mentioned, there are many other associations and different professions that are looking for the same thing. If I'm not mistaken, I believe yourself, Mr. Speaker, in your position as the member for Pictou East, have also tabled a bill that would deal with the planning planning engineers or professional planners. I believe that is that is their official title, which is an example of another association which wishes to update its legislation and to make the necessary changes to better reflect how their association is working. And Mr. Speaker, I note, for example, that the next bill on the order paper, Bill number 235, is the Dispensing Opticians Act, which is another piece of legislation dealing with these groups. And in the past, we've seen here, Mr. Speaker, where I believe the professional designers, I think that's what their title was called. I had mistakenly referred to it a few times, but they themselves had come forward, and it was the same thing. They had brought forward legislation. They had given us the letters of support from their membership. They were at law amendments to make their representations, and they followed the legislation through the House. And if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Speaker, the other night here in the gallery, I believe I noticed Dr. Sangster that was here, who is my optometrist here in Halifax, from the group of eye doctors, Dobbelstein, Davis and Gray and Sangster. And so I was certainly pleased to see that they have been following this legislation as well through the House and have made themselves available to answer any questions that may come from this legislation, and to assist us as legislators in making sure that this is the proper way to proceed, and more importantly, that it does have the full support of their organization. So, Mr. Speaker, with those words, again, I'm pleased to see that this bill has made its way through the House, that it has received support. I'm assuming it does have the support of the NDP on third reading. I haven't heard from them, but I'm assuming that they as well do support the optometrists here in the province, and that they're giving their support to this bill being able to move forward. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, it is certainly our hope that the minister responsible, the Minister of Health in this case, is going to follow the legislation after it leaves this House. He's going to make sure that it is proclaimed in a timely fashion, that the regulations are in place, and that the bill is put into effect here in this province. And I believe that the ministers who are bringing forward legislation here should have an onus to follow through on it, because as we've shown, many of the bills that have passed through this House sit and they're not moved on by the government. And I believe if a minister is going to take the time at this House to bring a bill forward, I believe that minister should at least bear the responsibility of following the progress of that bill, making sure that it's followed through, and not assigning blame to other members of government or through cabinet or through priorities and planning or through the Premier's office if legislation isn't moving forward. So anyways, Mr. Speaker, it's an important piece of legislation. I want to congratulate the Association of Optometrists who have brought this forward, all their staff who have worked on this, the provincial staff who have put time into this, and again, it's another example of where this legislature works at its best when we can modernize the acts dealing with professions here in this province, and we can do so by having their full support and having them as meaningful players in the process used to make those necessary changes. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place and look forward to this bill passing third reading, and also we will certainly be following up to make sure that the government does make the necessary provisions to put this bill and its regulations in effect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the Minister of Health to close debate on Bill number 232.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be able to close the debate on this bill. I can assure the Honourable House Leader of the third party that the dental hygienists and the dentists are working with the Department of Health to be able to, their objective is to be able to bring forward legislation in the spring with respect to that matter. And I can also say that at the urgings of the Honourable Member for Colchester North, that the government has in fact started a process of monitoring its legislation with respect to proclamation and the dealing of Colchester North. I'm sorry, what did I say? Oh. Bill Angel, what's his? What? Yeah, Colchester North. Okay. He's a very enlightened minister. Remember, that's why you do it, Mr. Speaker. So we do have put in place a process of tracking our legislation to ensure that regulations are being developed in appropriate time frame, and we are doing that. So again, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to conclude the debate on this bill.
Thank you. The motion is for third reading on Bill 232. Is the House ready for the question? Question is called. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 232, entitled An Act Respecting the Practice of Optometry.
I order that the bill do pass. Order that the title be read by the clerk, and order that the bill be engrossed. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 235, the Dispensing Opticians Act?
Bill number 235. Recognize the Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this bill be now read for the third time, and it is a companion piece of legislation to the bill which we previously passed.
Question's been called. Motion is for third reading on Bill number 235. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded, nay.
Is the motion carried?
Motion is carried.
Bill 235, entitled An Act Respecting Dispensing Opticians.
I order that the bill do pass. I order that the title be as read by the clerk, and I order that the bill be engrossed. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 236, the Small Claims Court Act?
Bill number 236. I recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would now move that this bill be read a third time. I'd like to thank the honourable members who have supported the bill thus far. I believe that this bill will further enhance access to justice in Nova Scotia, and that it will in fact provide for those people who hitherto have not been able to have these kind of matters adjudicated at an affordable cost with an opportunity to do so. And with that, I would move third reading.
Recognize the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on Bill number 236. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to speak on this bill at second reading, and so, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to take this opportunity to put on the record some of my comments, and I should point out, Mr. Speaker, that I have spoken directly with the Minister of Justice relating the concerns that I had with this bill, and so he will be a bit familiar with some of the comments that I am about to make on this. Mr. Speaker, we've seen the limits on small claims courts. I believe they may have started, it was around the $5,000 range. They moved then to $10,000. I remember during my time here as a member that we also, and it was under this Minister of Justice, it may have been 2 or 3 years ago, I believe, that we increased the limit to $15,000. Mr. Speaker, we're now moving in this bill, Bill number 236, to move that limit. We were going up in increments of 5,000, but this time we're jumping from 15,000 to 25,000. Now, Mr. Speaker, in my limited legal career, I've actually had the opportunity to spend more time in small claims court than any other court. And because of the nature of the court, Mr. Speaker, it's an opportunity where, like so many other aspects of the job as an MLA, people will look to you for guidance and in some cases for representation in this court. Because the idea with small claims court is that people can go in, have their matters heard in a timely fashion, and at the same time as for lawyers or for MLAs, it's an opportunity to be able to go to court without the normal requirements of the paperwork and the filing that one would see in a typical court. If one is going to go to the Nova Scotia Supreme Court or the Court of Appeal, the amount of documents that have to be prepared before you even step foot in court are quite significant. Small claims court is the exact opposite. The idea is to try to keep the court as simple as possible, making it as easy for Nova Scotians as possible to be able to access justice and to be able to have themselves heard on matters which in the big picture may not seem important to others, but certainly for them are of great importance, whether it is commercial transactions, whether it is a fee for service where service wasn't properly rendered, whether it's an agreement amongst parties that wasn't respected. The amount of matters that can be heard through small claims is quite significant, Mr. Speaker, and I would submit to you that more and more people are using the small claims court system to have matters heard. And the more that we move the limit, the monetary limit on what can be claimed, naturally, the more it allows for matters to be heard, because under the old rules, if you had a matter that was for $20,000 or more, you couldn't go to small claims unless you were prepared to reduce your claim to meet the $15,000 threshold. Now we've moved that up to $25,000 with this legislation, which makes it that much more available for Nova Scotians to be able to have their matters heard. Now, some of the issues that I have with this, Mr. Speaker, is one of the first questions I asked the Minister of Justice when I saw this bill was, who made the request to bring this bill forward? I fully suspected that the answer would be the Nova Scotia Bar Society, the representative society of lawyers in this province, and the authority, one would think, to speak on legal matters. Lo and behold, no such request came from the Bar Society. This was a request that came from the Minister's own staff. I would love to see what sort of documents the Minister was provided, what sort of a memo, what sort of a brief that was presented to him as to why we should be moving from 15,000 to 25,000. I've heard the Minister's comments, the idea of expanding the court and increasing the threshold and allowing more Nova Scotians to access it, but I'm curious as to whether there was some sort of backlog that they were concerned about in other courts, or who was pushing for this. And I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that knowing that the Bar Society and its executive director have spent quite a bit of time here at the legislature in the past when we've dealt with justice bills, I must express significant surprise, and I'd even say dismay, that on this, such an important bill dealing with the legal system of this province, the Bar Society has been silent. The executive director, to my knowledge, has been nowhere to be seen. And I question why that is the case, because this raises so many issues, especially issues such as the non-represented litigants, which has been an issue in this province, which deals with the issue of legal aid, which deals with the issue of Nova Scotians being able to access lawyers to represent them in matters. We have absolutely no comment from the Bar. We have no comment from the Bar as to whether they support it moving up to 25,000. Should it be 50,000, or should it have been only 20,000? We don't know. They've been silent on that as well. What impact will this have on the adjudicators that we now have here in the province? Because their decisions now, $15,000 is a significant amount of money, but $25,000 is an even more significant amount of money. And I would submit to you that by increasing it to $25,000, we're going to get into more complex matters. Those complex matters, I would submit to you, Mr. Speaker, the idea with small claims court is that it starts at 6:30 and that by 10 o'clock it wraps up. I would submit to you that when you're going to be dealing with cases up to $25,000 that are going to be involved, they're not going to be heard in one night. It's going to take much more time to have those heard. And so because of that, what plans has the Minister made to possibly see that there be more small claims court sittings in the province? Have they discussed that? Have they discussed possibly having to employ more adjudicators to be able to deal with this? Because for the most part, Mr. Speaker, we know that most adjudicators are lawyers who have their own practice, or they're members of a firm. So this is almost something that's done on the side. And so realizing that it's not a full-time occupation, realizing some of the challenges that they have dealing with their regular legal files, it makes you wonder, are they going to have the time to be able to commit to rendering very important decisions that could see parties awarded up to $25,000? So those are all questions, Mr. Speaker, that I'm concerned about. One of the issues, again, that I raised with the Minister of Justice is, was he going to raise the filing fee because of the fact that we've moved to $25,000? Currently, I believe the filing fee is $75, which is not very much money if it's a $25,000 claim. Some might argue it's a lot of money if it's a $200 claim. But basically, the Minister has indicated to me that no such thing will happen. which makes it interesting that it costs you $75 if you're filing for $200 or $75 if you're filing for a $25,000 claim. So I would submit, Mr. Speaker, without trying to be too presumptuous, that will be a great temptation for the government in the next months and years to come to change that filing fee to have some sort of a prorated type system that, depending on how much you're claiming, that'll be how much you have to pay for the filing fee. And again, I could be wrong, Mr. Speaker, and time will tell as to whether the Minister of Justice would do such a thing. And he's told me that he won't, but then again, Mr. Speaker, it seems that we've had commitments in the past that have been varied, let's just say, rather than say not kept, but they've been varied. So those are some of the issues. And again, Mr. Speaker, when we're dealing with claims of $25,000, if you're a party that's sitting at home and suddenly you get served and said that someone else is taking you to court for $25,000, that's a significant amount of money. I don't think the average Nova Scotian has a little bit of a cushion of $25,000 that they're keeping just in case they need it, which raises the issue of, if we have Nova Scotians out there who can't afford the services of a lawyer, what do? Because you can't ignore a claim for $25,000, Mr. Speaker. One has to defend themselves. But the question becomes, is the Minister of Justice prepared now to review the services offered by legal aid, for example, so that if someone who's of modest means would be subject to a claim in small claims court for $25,000, are we prepared to look at the amount of services legal aid provides to possibly assist those people in that court to defend themselves? Which raises the issue of how much service legal aid provides to start off with. We know it's a limited service, I would say a quality, exceptional service, but they're tapped out. Most legal aid lawyers are carrying a file load, which is scary. There's no better way to describe it. It's an extreme amount of work that is put on them. They have very limited resources, and the demand continues to increase. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I've written to Legal Aid Commission numerous times appealing their decision not to provide representation to individuals. And I'm proud to say, Mr. Speaker, and maybe I shouldn't share this, but I'm proud to say that they haven't refused one of the appeals that I have put on behalf of a resident of Richmond County. They have given them representation each and every time, but with each letter, I write to them and I say, I understand that the demands put before you far exceed your ability, the staff and the resources that you have, and that is true. But then again, I make the plea for my constituent, and up to now, they've accepted it, but I realize it can't continue. One day they're going to have to say no. We just can't represent this individual because of the income or because of the area of law it is. And right now, legal aid basically is restricted to family law matters or criminal matters. That's it. And those are two matters that don't show up in small claims court. So if you have individuals, and we have constituents who are being faced with claims for up to $25,000 and they can't afford to get a lawyer, who's going to go there with them? Is it going to be us as MLAs? I know I've done it on a number of occasions, but I'll tell you, I'm certainly not comfortable going to small claims court without the necessary hours of preparation to represent someone for a claim of $25,000. Oh yes, it's not an issue about me going to small claims court. I can do that, but it's a matter of how much time preparation is going to be in. And Mr. Speaker, when people were going in, I've seen cases in small claims court where someone claims that they bought wood from an individual and the other individual says they never got paid. The claim was for $200. The two parties went in there and they argued over it and the decision was rendered. But when you're talking about $25,000, people aren't going in there unrepresented anymore for $25,000. Those who can afford to aren't going in there unrepresented. But what do we do with those who can't afford to? Those who are the defendants, who all of a sudden the sheriff shows up to the door and serves them with the papers. By moving to this limit of $25,000, are we putting in the necessary services to be able to assist Nova Scotians who might be subject to these claims? The other thing I would have liked to have seen, Mr. Speaker, and I haven't had the opportunity to do so myself, but I'm wondering, what is the cap that is used in other jurisdictions throughout the country? Is $25,000 on the high end, the low end? Where are we at as compared to other provinces? And again, one would have hoped when the minister indicated to me that the request did not come from the Bar Society, but that it came from his staff, it would have been nice to see exactly why the staff recommended this. Have they have they addressed the issues that I have presented here today to be able to tell us, don't be concerned, we believe we've looked at this, we've reviewed it, here's why we rendered this recommendation to the minister, and here's why we believe that this is going to make for a more efficient court system, and that is going to allow Nova Scotians, again, to have easier access to justice, to have their matters heard in a more timely fashion. One of the other matters, Mr. Speaker, which I raised with the minister was, are we going to put in strict time limits on the adjudicators to render decisions? Speaker, I'm aware, I know the adjudicator in the Strait area has been very vigilant in being able to provide decisions on a very timely fashion where I have been to small claims court, which is about a half dozen times now, I would say. But when those were for matters that were for significantly smaller amounts of money, I question when he's going to have matters before him or her as adjudicator, that are for $25,000. I would think that they're going to want to take some time before rendering a decision, recognizing the amount of money that is involved in that case. So I also question the minister on that, and would hope that he'd give some sort of indication in his closing comments about how they intend on dealing with that to make sure that small claims court continues to be a court that is efficient, expedient, and can render decisions in a timely fashion. Mr. Speaker, one of the other matters that has been raised and that I've brought to the minister's attention is that the whole idea of small claims court was, for the most part, an opportunity for people to be able to go to court and have their matters heard without the need to have lawyers. That was one of the original concepts of it. And for the most part, in the beginning, that's how it worked, because the claims were of a smaller amount that it didn't really make sense for you to go and to pay a lawyer to go. Let's say if you were claiming for $600 and a lawyer told you it's going to cost me $1,500 to go to court with you, well, it didn't really make sense to ask a lawyer to go to small claims court with you when that amount was smaller than what was being charged. But when you're moving to $25,000, Mr. Speaker, let's not be naive. $25,000 is going to be an opportunity for bill collectors. It's going to be an opportunity for larger companies and for larger organizations which already have either legal counsel on staff or have readily access to legal counsel. And my fear is that they are going to now use this court as an opportunity to send their lawyers in to seek damage against Nova Scotians that are not in a position to defend themselves with lawyers as well. So we're moving to, my fear is that we're moving to a plateau where the playing field is not going to be level. And it's extremely difficult if you owe money to an organization and that you've been trying to find a way to pay them back, that suddenly they serve you with papers to go to small claims court and a high-priced lawyer shows up in the rural courthouses of Nova Scotia, and you're left there to try to defend yourself and explain why you've been unable to meet their payment deadlines that they have submitted to you. So, Mr. Speaker, that is an example of some of the concerns that is raised when we start moving the cap on claims in the small claims court. And we want to make sure that the minister is following the progress of this legislation once it's put into effect, and once that the small claims court are going to have their the limit of damages increased to such amount, to see what impact it is going to have. And I'm curious as to whether the Minister of Justice has put any sort of a committee within his own department to keep a review of this, because I'll tell you why that concerns me. So, Mr. Speaker, we assume sometimes that when government brings in changes, that they're actually watching to see what effect those changes are going to have. Now, unfortunately, in many cases, it's a false assumption on our part. I'll give you an example. Bill 79 was passed in this House. It had to do with the Gas Regulation Act, the Pricing Control Act, I believe it was called. So it passed this House. Now, we know the Minister of Service Nova Scotia stood in this House and said, with this bill, no other service stations will close. That's what he said. It's in Hansard. He said it won't close. Second, he said, we're going to protect Nova Scotians from high gas prices. So when the Deputy Minister showed up in front of Public Accounts, we asked him, since Bill 79 passed, how many service stations have closed? And he said, well, we don't keep track of that. I said, what do you mean you don't keep track of that? Oh, well, he said, we get a report at the end of the year from Environment and Labor that tells us. So I said, you mean to tell me an issue that's been of such importance to the government, such importance to Nova Scotians that you haven't kept track of how many service stations have closed since Bill 79? And the answer was no, we haven't. So again, that's why I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, with this bill, one would hope that the government is going to keep track of that. And Mr. Speaker, when I rose in the House and I questioned the Premier about 60 service stations closing, their response was, well, there's some that have opened, but they've never told us how many, and they never told us the difference, and they never did the Premier explain why, when he said, his minister said, no service stations would close, that some have actually closed. A significant amount, I would submit to you. Why that failure hasn't been explained, well, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians will remember that as the Premier leaves this place for the commitment made and the commitment not kept. When even worse, Mr. Speaker, when the Deputy Minister was asked if he supported the comments by his own minister in the House, and he said, no, I can't, because the bill was never meant to achieve what he said it would achieve in the House. And again, this session that was to deal with energy, the Premier is silent on the failings of Bill 79. Another thing, Mr. Speaker, if I can give another example of why it causes me concern, the Minister and the Premier said that with that bill, they would be able to bring in some sort of a warning of price increases. I think everyone will remember that. It was a 48-hour warning of any price increase. They were going to implement that if only the opposition passed Bill 79. Mr. Speaker, we did that. So I asked the question to the Deputy Minister, what happened to the 48-hour warning? Are you guys still working on it? Lo and behold, the answer was, working on it. It's been ready for months. And I said, well, what is the problem? Why is it not being done? The government thought it was a wonderful idea. He said, Cabinet has yet to give instructions to implement it. So it's ready to go. The regulations are ready to go, ready to be put in place. It might take a little bit before it's actually up and running, but Cabinet has yet to give the instructions. So that's another example, Mr. Speaker, when I say, when we make changes or we bring bills, we see government bills coming in, that it's a false illusion for us to believe that government's actually following up to see what the impact is. Bill 79 there's no better example. With such an important issue, energy and closing of gas stations, the independent retailers that were here, the promises, the handshake from the Premier, and then to ask them, have any service stations closed since Bill 79? And for the Deputy Minister to say, no. Why? Because we don't keep track of that. Mr. Speaker, I would submit to you, that is why we would like to see with this bill that the government is going to give actually an assurance that, let's say within the Department of Justice, that they're actually keeping track of, is there going to be an increase in the amount of requests to use small claims court? Is there going to be a decrease? Good question. Are they going to be keeping track of how many lawyers are involved in these cases as compared to before? Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, when lawyers are involved, I'm sure the adjudicator is receiving briefs and receiving memos and receiving different legal papers putting forward their case. And the question becomes, at what point is the cap reach the stage where the average Nova Scotian cannot walk into court and expect to understand the procedure or to be able to properly either defend themselves or be able to properly argue their case if they are the plaintiff? What is that limit? And is anyone even working on being able to tell us that? And again, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, it disappoints me greatly that the Bar Society has been silent on this issue. Because I know I've had discussions with the Bar Society about the services offered by legal aid, about the fact more and more that we have unrepresented litigants here in this province, people who are forced to go into court without legal representation. Our system isn't supposed to work that way, Mr. Speaker. We cannot expect average Nova Scotians or any Nova Scotian to have the abilities to be able to walk into a court and to be able to either understand the proceedings or to be able to properly present themselves and have an appreciation of what is going on. I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker. I was in small claims court not long ago with a gentleman who brought forward a claim. I believe his claim was for $400. That was fine. The defendants, who I went to represent, counterclaimed for $4,000. So when we were there, it was clear that the gentleman who brought forward the claim didn't truly understand the situation he was in, because it was clear as we went that when I asked him, do you appreciate the fact that if you're unsuccessful here and we are successful, you're going to owe us $4,000? And the gentleman just didn't understand that how that was happening. And it came to the point that where it was clear he had no case, but we certainly felt we had one. I made the offer, if he drops his matter now, we won't proceed. But make sure, I told the adjudicator, please try to explain to him, if he doesn't want to drop his matter now, and we do proceed, we will be vigorously looking for our $4,000 that we have claimed. And I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, the adjudicator went to great pains to make the gentleman understand that concept. That was for $4,000. Now, can you imagine when it's going to be for $25,000? Because now, even though you're claiming for so much money, let's say you're making a claim for $5,000 and you're the plaintiff, the defendant could come back with a claim for $25,000. So all of a sudden, it's not so simple, Mr. Speaker. It's to the point now where you have to question, you have to make sure, and I question how many Nova Scotians who are thinking small claims court is a very efficient court for me. I don't want to pay a lawyer to go into the Supreme Court. I want to be able to keep my matter as simple as can be, go in, have it heard, have a decision, that's it. That's fine, but the defendant, be careful what the defendant's going to come back with. Because all of a sudden, what may have been simple to you as plaintiff to go in unrepresented is going to be difficult when the defendant shows up with a lawyer looking for $25,000 in a counterclaim. That is some of the concerns, Mr. Speaker, that I have. And again, I don't have the level of comfort. I certainly supported, Mr. Speaker, when we moved from $10,000 to $15,000. But at that time, and a review of Hansard will reflect that I raised similar concerns at that time as to how far were we prepared to go for small claims. How much was too much or how much was enough? That is some of the issues I raised back then. We were just moving at $5,000 increments at that point. By this time, we've jumped $10,000 to $25,000. And again, I not only share those similar concerns, I share them with much more zeal and vigor because of the fact that we're talking that much more money that is going to be put in front of the small claims court system now. Mr. Speaker, one of the other issues, as I alluded to earlier, is with the adjudicators themselves. And I'm wondering whether the minister is prepared to table with us any sort of documentation that he may have had with the adjudicators or with any of their representatives, indicating that the government is moving towards this plateau of $25,000 and whether they had any sort of feedback on that. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we had a legislation from the optometrists, and it was clear that this was something that they supported and that they brought forward. But I wonder, are the adjudicators throughout this province, prior to the Minister of Justice sending out a press release saying he was changing the limit, did any of them actually get consulted and asked, do you have any concerns or do you have any suggestions if we are to move to $25,000? To date, from what the ministers provided us with, we are left to wonder what sort of feedback they may have been able to provide, what sort of assurances that they may have been able to give that they are happy with such changes, or whether they do have some concerns on that. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, they are the people who are going to be faced with these decisions with that much more money on the line. Mr. Speaker, one of the other questions that I put to the minister is that, will there be more money made available to adjudicators because of the fact that we now expect them to be able to render decisions for that much more money, and one would expect that with that much more money comes more complicated legal matters being put before them. Again, there's been no indication at this point whether there will be any change in the pay that is made available to adjudicators here in this province, and so we await to see what the cost is going to be for that, Mr. Speaker. So.
Mr. Honourable Member, wonder if you'd mind an interruption for an introduction.
Sure.
Okay, the Honourable Member from Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in your gallery today we have Sandra McDonald with us from the Cape Breton Partnership, who was up here to appear before the Private and Local Bills Committee this evening. She's in the gallery today with the Minister and member for Cape Breton North, also a Cape Bretoner today, and I'm sure that I'm sure that Sandra is telling the minister about the importance of the bill that's before the House today, and we all realize that it's an initiative for Cape Breton. I'd like the members to give a warm welcome to Senator MacDonald.
We welcome our guest here today and hope she enjoys the proceedings. I'll recognize the member from Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I was mentioning earlier, there are a number of issues which remain to be unanswered in regards to these changes. And again, as legislators, we have a responsibility to be able to tell our constituents and tell Nova Scotians that we truly understand the impact that the changes that we are passing this House are going to have. And unfortunately, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that I don't feel that I'm in a position to be able to give those types of assurances. And I'm not sure if my colleagues from the NDP who have legal backgrounds have those assurances themselves as to what the impact is going to be to this court system prior to allowing these changes to take place. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the second increase that has taken place in the small claims court system since this government has been in office in 1999. It's the second increase that has been brought in by the Minister of Justice. And what would have been interesting, Mr. Speaker, is if the Minister and his staff had kept some sort of a record of the amount of matters heard in small claims court when the limit was $10,000, after the limit went to $15,000, and what sort of presumptions that his staff have made now that it's moving to $25,000. Again, that would give us an indication as legislators as to what impact it is going to have, and some sense of assurance that at the end of the day, a court system which has been working well is going to continue to work well under its intended structure as long as even after these changes are going to be imposed. Mr. Speaker, I'm one of the other issues. One of the other issues that this matter raises is the fact that once again under this legislation, Bill 236, is that Clause 3 says this Act comes into force on such day as the Governor and Council orders and declares by proclamation. So I don't know if the Minister of Justice has set a date that he actually intends to have this bill proclaimed, and at what point Nova Scotians can expect that the court is going to move to the $25,000 limit. So that, I don't believe the Minister to date has given that indication, and maybe when he rises to speak on to close debate that he will give us an indication whether that change will take place in 2005 or if he's waiting sometime in 2006 before making that change to the court. And again, one would also question what sort of notice will be given to Nova Scotians as to when this is actually going to take place. But Mr. Speaker, my fear continues to be when you're going to have $25,000 claims, Nova Scotians are going to see more and more lawyers in the small claims court of this province. And that, Mr. Speaker, when that continues to happen, our small claims court no longer becomes an efficient court, one that is simple to understand, and one that can give very rapid decisions. It's going to get more complicated. There's going to be more and more legal briefs being presented to the adjudicators. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians who are going to go into that small claims court without representation, whereas the other party is represented, will clearly see that they are not on a level playing field, that they are at extreme disadvantage, and that is going to be at that point where Nova Scotians are either going to withdraw the claims they would like to bring to the courts, or that they are going to send a message to us as legislators and to and to the Minister that we've gone too far in increasing the limit to $25,000. And again, without seeing whether anyone is actually observing the court system to see whether there are any sort of negative impact on these changes, makes us wonder how much longer that we have to allow these changes to take place before we're able to examine clearly what sort of an impact that these changes have had.
Monsieur le Président, je voulais prendre quelques instants pour faire des remarques sur le projet de loi 236.
projet de loi qui cherche à changer le montant d'argent qu'on est permis de vouloir faire des plaintes pour dans notre cour qui est connue à la Small Claims Court. Je ne suis pas certain que c'est la traduction directement en français, mais la cour même a été créée, Monsieur le Président, pour permettre aux gens de Nouvelle-Écosse d'aller avoir leurs plaintes entendues. Un système qui sera un peu plus facile à comprendre, qui sera plus facile d'avoir les décisions de donner et qui ira plus vite. Monsieur le Président, comme nous le savons, les gens maintenant qui veulent aller en cours pour des différents processus peuvent attendre des semaines, des mois, des fois des années, avant que finalement qu'ils ont leur journée en cours. L'idée de la Cour de Small Claims, c'est l'idée que les plaintes peuvent être entendues sans avoir besoin d'entendre pour grand montant de temps. Moi, j'ai vu moi-même, Monsieur le Président, des cas où une fois que la plainte est commencée, la demande est faite, les papiers sont donnés au défendant et à la personne qui emmène la plainte de la première place. On peut attendre peut-être un mois, des fois 2 mois maximum. Alors, quand on a un système de cours qui fonctionne comme ça, je peux vous dire, Monsieur le Président, que c'est une bonne façon d'avoir des différents problèmes qu'il y a entre les gens, soit c'est des problèmes entre des contrats pour des services, soit que c'est une entente entre les différents partis qui n'a pas bien fonctionné. Il y a toutes sortes de différents problèmes qu'on peut faire entendre à la Cour de Small Claims. Alors, Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, avec ce projet de loi, on cherche à changer le maximum qui peut être clamé de 15 000 à 25 000 $. Comme je l'ai dit en anglais, voici le ministre de Justice qui a introduit des changes. Ça fait quelques années, je m'en rappelle d'avoir eu parlé au sujet ici à la maison. Le montant avant, le maximum était 10 000 $. Ça a monté à 15 000 $ il y a quelques années par ce ministre de Justice. Et maintenant, on fait la demande de l'augmenter par 10 000 $ à 25 000 $. Alors, Monsieur le Président, la question qui me pose moi-même, première question que j'ai posée au ministre, alors on commence avec ça. Première question que j'ai posée au ministre, j'ai dit, c'est qui a fait la demande d'augmenter le maximum de 15 000 à 25 000? Je m'attendais que le ministre allait nous dire que c'était le barreau, l'organisation représentant les avocates de la province de Nouvelle-Écosse. Malheureusement, j'étais surpris d'entendre que la demande est venue du département même du ministre de la Justice. Alors, ça nous cause, Monsieur le Président, ça nous cause moi de poser la question, c'est pourquoi? Pourquoi faire la demande d'augmenter le montant qui est permis dans cette cour? Est-ce qu'il y a eu quelque sorte d'étude qui a été faite par les fonctionnaires au bureau du ministre? Est-ce qu'ils ont fait une étude ou bien ils ont surveillé cela qui se passait de toutes les autres provinces canadiennes? On ne sait pas ça non plus. Alors, quand on a un projet de loi qui vient ici, qui a à faire strictement avec l'administration de la justice ici à la province, et puis que le barreau, de ce qu'on connaît, n'est pas impliqué, ça me cause de poser des questions. Pour qui c'est qui pousse? Qui est-ce qui pousse cette initiative? Et le pourquoi? Le pourquoi que la demande est faite pour avoir augmenté le montant d'argent? La réponse, on ne la sait pas. Peut-être si le ministre aurait pu nous présenter avec des informations de ses fonctionnaires pour justifier pourquoi la demande a été faite, alors, comme parlementaire, on pourrait regarder ça et on aura une meilleure idée. Quand nous sommes demandés par les gens chez nous, qu'on représente, pourquoi le change a été fait, voici les raisons qui nous ont été présentées par le ministre, par les fonctionnaires du département de justice. Jusqu'à date, on ne les a pas. On ne les a pas. On a juste dit que c'était le temps d'augmenter le montant de 15 000 $ à 25 000 $, mais il n'y a aucune étude qui a été faite. On n'a aucune assurance que ça ne va pas décourager les gens à Nouvelle-Écosse de vouloir utiliser cette cour. Parce qu'à la fin de la journée, on sait bien que la Cour de Small Claims, ça adressait beaucoup les montants de gens qui s'attendaient pour des mois, des années, pour avoir leur plainte entendue. Alors, c'était une grande fonction de l'administration de la justice ici à notre province. Mais maintenant, quand on commence à augmenter les montants qui vont être entendus là, est-ce que ça va encore
baisser le montant des plaintes qui vont à la Cour suprême ou la Cour d'appel ici en Nouvelle-Écosse? Ou est-ce que ça va servir pour décourager les gens en Nouvelle-Écosse de vouloir avoir leur plainte entendue à cette Cour? Parce que c'est sans question, Monsieur le Président, que nous allons avoir des plaintes de 25 000 $. C'est sans question qu'il va y avoir des avocats qui vont être présents. Mais est-ce que les avocats vont être là pour les deux parties ou juste pour un ou une? C'est ça la question. Qui emmène la question de l'association de l'aide juridique, comme on connaît en anglais, legal aid, et les services qui sont offerts par l'aide juridique? On sait que les demandes qui sont faites à l'aide juridique sont beaucoup, c'est immense, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de gens en Nouvelle-Écosse qui ne sont pas dans une situation financière de pouvoir payer pour des services d'avocat. Alors, l'aide juridique continue d'avoir plus en plus de demandes, mais à la fin de la journée, on sait bien, M. le Président, que l'aide juridique a un budget. C'est juste un certain montant. Alors, ils ont juste accès à 6 temps d'avocats et d'avocates. Alors, à un moment donné, quand le budget va baisser et qu'on a juste un certain montant d'avocats, avocates disponibles, il faut leur faire des décisions de restricter quel service que nous allons offrir. Alors, on est rendu maintenant que, avec des très peu d'exceptions, pour la plupart, l'aide juridique va juste offrir des services pour les cas de la droit de la famille ou pour des cas criminels. C'est tout. Alors, on sait bien qu'à la cour de petite plainte, je pense que c'est ça la meilleure façon de décrire small claims, petite plainte, la cour de petite plainte, les services d'aide juridique ne sont pas disponibles. Parce que la Cour de petite plainte n'entend pas des processus de la droit de famille ou des processus criminels. Alors, on se demande qui va être là pour assister aux gens de Nouvelle-Écosse qui font face à des plaintes de 20 ou 25 000 $. On n'a aucune indication du ministre de la Justice, c'est combien il va adresser cette question. L'autre commentaire que j'ai fait, M. le Président, c'est que durant mon temps ici, à l'Assemblée, ça fait au-dessus de 7 ans que je suis ici. Quand il y a eu des questions de l'administration de la justice ici en la province ou des projets de loi qui avaient affaire avec l'administration de la justice, c'est souvent qu'on allait avoir le directeur général, le directeur exécutif du barreau de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui allait être ici, faire des représentations, parler aux parlementaires, avoir des discussions avec le ministre de la Justice. Et ça, c'était une des premières questions que j'ai demandées au ministre de la Justice. Est-ce que vous avez eu des représentations du barreau sur cette question? Et la réponse était non. Il faut dire, M. le Président, j'étais très surpris. Pourquoi le barreau de la Nouvelle-Écosse ne se trouvait pas, ne s'est pas fait disponible de vouloir nous dire, comme parlementaires, si le barreau était en faveur de ces échanges? Est-ce que le barreau même avait des différentes questions sur ce projet de loi? Est-ce que le barreau était totalement en support de ces échanges? Malheureusement, quand je me trouve ici, sur le débat de la troisième lecture, sur ce projet de loi 236, ça, c'est des questions que je n'ai pas les réponses. Parce que même quand nous avons eu le comité des amendements des lois, où ce qu'on invite le public ou les associations de venir faire des présentations sur les projets de loi, je comprends que le barreau n'était pas présent. Ils n'ont pas fait de présentation. J'ai reçu aucune lettre, aucune correspondance du barreau pour indiquer s'ils étaient en support ou pas sur ce projet de droit. Et malheureusement, le ministre de la Justice n'est pas dans une position de vouloir nous présenter ça non plus parce que la discussion que j'ai eue avec lui, il a dit qu'il ne savait pas. Alors, le ministre de la Justice nous présente un projet de droit pour changer l'administration de la justice dans la province et il nous dit qu'il n'a aucune idée de la position du barreau de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Je vous dis, Monsieur le Président, que ça me trouble. Ça me trouble beaucoup. Parce que depuis que le barreau même n'a pas fait la demande pour cette change, que c'est des fonctionnaires au département de la justice, ça me fait demander le pourquoi. Est-ce que la cour de petite plainte ne fonctionnait pas bien assez? Est-ce qu'il y a de l'information qu'ils peuvent nous soumettre sur cette question de pourquoi augmenter le montant de 15 000 à 25 000 $? Je n'ai pas les réponses. Et je peux vous dire, Monsieur le Président, comme je l'ai dit en anglais, j'ai eu l'occasion, comme vous le savez, je suis avocat, mais j'ai été élu c'était très de bonheur dans ma carrière d'avocat, alors je n'ai pas eu l'occasion de d'être en cours trop souvent pour des différentes plaintes, mais la cour de petite plainte, j'ai eu l'occasion d'y aller à plusieurs reprises. Et je peux vous dire, Monsieur le Président, comme plusieurs de les demandes qui sont faites à nous, parlementaires, aller représenter des gens à la cour de petite plainte, c'en est une. Et moi-même, depuis le fait que les gens chez nous sont au courant que je suis avocat, c'est souvent qu'ils vont me demander d'aller les représenter. Et souvent, je peux vous dire, Monsieur le Président, que c'est difficile. Quand nous savons qu'il y a des gens qu'on représente, qui n'ont pas le moyen de pouvoir payer pour les services d'un avocat ou une avocate, c'est très difficile à dire non, de ne pas se faire disponible. Mais en même temps, Monsieur le Président, je peux vous dire que c'est rendu point maintenant, si nous allons augmenter le montant à 25 000 $, ça va le faire presque impossible pour des députés comme moi-même, autres députés, soit qu'ils soient avocats, soit qu'ils ne soient pas avocats, d'aller représenter des gens à la cour de petite plainte quand on